It's a pleasure to join you all today, and thanks to Regina and BJ for organizing this session. I'd like to share reflections on directions with the responsibility and governance of AI, with a particular focus on experiences with efforts at Microsoft, where we've been making an intensive effort in grappling with corporate responsibilities with the rise of AI capabilities. So I'll share highlights over the next few minutes of our 6-year experiment in executing a model of corporate governance of AI technologies that guides how Microsoft develops and fields AI systems and services. First, I'd like to reiterate some of the surprises on jumps in capabilities in AI, surprises even to long-term research scientists in the field. Now, with as much to do, and AI scientists remain mystified by the powers of human intellect versus what we can do with today's AI systems. Still, we're seeing advances with wedges of capabilities, largely viewed as narrowly focused, yet impressive. These abilities are measured via specific sets of metrics that show remarkable gains in performance and continuing growth with the size of training data and with allocations of computation. The continuing climb in accuracies, particularly in the realms of automated vision and language, is remarkable. The annual AI index, spawned as a project of the 100-year study on AI at Stanford, contains rich information on trends. And here's a chart drawn from the AI index that shows advances in automated object recognition. In this particular challenge, the ImageNet Top 5 challenge, showing a surpassing of a human baseline, the dashed purple line, and a continuation of refinement. We see similar trends in surpassing of human baselines on a variety of natural language tasks, like the squad task, on an analysis of text followed by answering questions. There are now many curves like this, especially in language and vision. I refer people to the 2022 AI Index for more details. Even more interesting and relevant to reflections about governance are what I see as disruptive breakthroughs in applications that leverage gains across different sets of advances to create fundamentally new kinds of capabilities. These include advances like the creation of a system that can perform speech-to-speech translation across many languages. Other disruptive applications, like the one pictured on the right here, is the Copilot system that leverages a model called GPT-3, a language model, but it helps programmers by automatically providing assistance with computer programming. Microsoft now has this in private preview, and we're seeing tremendous uptake by software developers, with significant portions of programs being written by the system. On the right, represents another disruptive technology, the application of deep neural networks in the sciences, including biology, where we've been working very closely with the David Baker Lab at the University of Washington, down to the level of code, and we're seeing incredible new tools for protein design. Now, stepping back, as we've heard today, that these rising capabilities where AI is reaching into domains and realms that have been the provenance of human intellect, are leading to important rising concerns with the influences of AI applications on people and society, including challenges with fairness, understandability, reliability and safety, privacy, agency. I've had the fortune to engage closely at Microsoft and externally in advisory and board roles across a spectrum of organizations, including government agencies. And all of these, I believe, these organizations will have important roles to play with regards to understanding the influences and developing best practices and regulations. While I've worked on issues around policies and governance of AI in civil society as well as in government agencies, I believe it's important to start locally in one's own home. In my case, one of the largest companies in the world, Microsoft, to explore what tech companies can do with self-regulation and to share our best practices and tools via multi-party stakeholder groups, civil society groups, government agencies. Now, important roles will be played by other bodies for sure, including professional organizations. For example, ISO and IEEE have developed safety standards which are applicable and have special efforts in AI. And also federal agencies like NIST, OSTP, and onto international efforts at the UN, OECD, and so on. Now, our story at Microsoft with AI governance starts in 2016 with a meeting I had with our chief legal counsel, Brad Smith. I was then a leader in AI in research and director of Microsoft's main research lab at Redmond, the main campus where Microsoft is based. Proposed to Brad that we should put together a panel of advisors who would develop points of view and processes for making decisions about the AI technologies that Microsoft builds. He agreed, and we worked to build a cross-division committee, an advisory committee, Microsoft researchers, legal folks, and others, named the Ether Committee. Ether stands for AI Ethics and Effects in Engineering and Research. Now, shortly thereafter, Satya Nadella, our company CEO, reached out to create a little compact group and to formulate a set of principles that might guide Microsoft on our path around responsibilities with AI. He led the conversation by asking us, what are our values around AI systems? What did we care about? Where might values guide us, and what values should guide us? We came up with a set of 6 principles that have stood the test of time: fairness, reliability, privacy and security, inclusiveness, transparency, and accountability. And we defined what we meant by them initially in a manuscript called The Future Computed that's freely available on the web. With these values as guides, we pushed forward with the Ether Committee as a cross-company coordinated hub of top thinkers, as well as divisional leads from the major divisions that comprise Microsoft. These were all nominated by the divisional leaders. And beyond the main committee, we set up a set of topically focused working groups, each co-chaired by top people in their respective areas. Say that I found it extremely useful once you stood up the committee, the main Ether Committee and working groups, to have the company CEO support us in a very strong way, including an all-company note here, and here's a snippet of that note, talking about the Ether Committee and its role, and that we needed to really be proactive in formulating policies, how to respond to specific issues about AI in a responsible way. Importantly, beyond the topic-focused groups, we set up a special process-centric group called the Ether Sensitive Uses Working Group and Program. And the Sensitive Uses Committee has been comprised of several AI scientists, ethicists, lawyers, and policy experts. We work to define attributes of what we meant by a sensitive use of AI that would require special deliberation and decisions, and set up a company-wide intake and review process. Now, what are the criteria for a sensitive use of AI? Our criteria has stood the test of time. We defined sensitive uses as AI technologies that either threaten to cause physical or emotional harm, lead to denial of access to consequential services and opportunities, or be a threat to human rights, democracy, and civil society. And given the importance of these criteria for starting a review process on specific cases, we crafted the definitions with care and made them available to the company. Here you see the risk of physical, psychological injury, consequential impact on legal position or life opportunities, threat to human rights. Here's a screenshot of our intake site. As of today, there have been nearly 500 cases reviewed by the sensitive uses process, spanning multiple challenges, including risks to human rights and civil liberties, challenges with fairness, issues around safety, health, disclosure of automation, and potential for malevolent uses of technologies. To give you a sense, here's a chart of cases and actions for a period of 18 months. 3 years ago, snapshot taken back then. At the time, we had about 177 total cases. I should say about 200, but 113 of these 177 were allowed to proceed with guidance or constraints. 11 were halted. Here's the view by chief sector of the application type. Again, calling out the gold portions of the bars representing proceed with specific guidance, like in government here, you see, and pink, do not proceed assessment. You see healthcare, defense and intelligence, public safety, and so on. Now, each case is quite rich, and I hope to see a corpus of these deliberations and cases someday shared publicly. Here's an example of guidance to proceed with constraints. And this was the case of a citywide public safety system created by our contractor team, the special purpose software. But this particular platform for safety was being pursued by a government with a country with a poor human rights record. The first request to deploy the base system was rejected. The team on the ground, the sales team, came back with a more narrowly scoped application to use the system at a museum of antiquities. That would not fly either. However, the Sensitive Uses Committee allowed a limited controlled version of the software with these restrictions okayed. And here's the language that was accepted by the customer, limiting the AI uses in this application, including the use of audio or video detection of age, gender, or ethnicity, and facial recognition techniques, as well as the use of machine learning or other predictive analytics to predict future events or to classify people or situations. Now, what we've called our responsible AI ecosystem has evolved and matured. Ether stood up a responsible AI champs program, educating people and building a community of folks across the company that could help with sensitive uses, for example, and trainings. 2 years ago, our audit team evaluated what Ether was doing and wanted even more. The recommendation was to stand up a formal compliance body within our legal division, which we call the Office of Responsible AI, or AURA. And Ether and AURA work together, AURA focusing on compliance and responsible AI standard that the company must follow in developing AI systems and applications, and company-wide annual trainings. We also moved Ether's sensitive uses program from Ether into AURA. Now, AURA has worked with the Ether team to compose a company-wide responsible AI standard of required and recommended practices for all AI system development. We're making our standard public in the coming year. The standard structures its requirements along the lines of our 6 AI values, and structures each into a set of goals and requirements. And beyond requirements, there are recommended tools and practices for fulfilling the requirements. For example, one of the tools called out within the area of fairness is FairLearn, a Microsoft research and Ether tool for exploring and visualizing behaviors of a classifier for different demographic groups. We ask people to employ this tool as a recommended practice to document metrics and interventions with regards to the fairness of products and services. Another example of a practice here is called out in the transparency area of the responsible AI standard, called a transparency note, where a structure with recommended fields for clear disclosure of multiple aspects about the operation and limitations and uses of technology are disclosed to end users and organizations. This is the transparency note that is attached to Microsoft facial recognition software, which includes directions with the use of the technology, its limitations, caveats, and so on. Now, in thinking about experiences with building and fielding AI systems in a responsible manner, I've noted the rise of an important process and cycle that's coming amidst growing sensitivities to the socio-technical influences of AI technologies. So teams at Microsoft, with their rising sensitivities, take on responsibility for addressing concerns that can arise with one or more values called out in our responsible AI standard. And this leads to core additional work on technologies themselves to refine the scope, capability, and applications as best possible. Then the updated application of technology comes into deliberation about responsibilities and thinking how we can best govern the uses. And this whole process can be iterative, and it includes recommendations that the technology will require monitoring and updating for the unexpected complex interactions of AI in the open world. You can imagine the high-level values are really not specific enough for guiding thinking and governance, but the requirements, practices, and metrics and tools called out in the responsible AI standard helps to clarify thinking and goals. I'd like to end with a couple of examples that capture our processes and the latter cycle of innovation. I'll turn to 3 disruptive AI technologies. First, Copilot, which I mentioned in my earlier slides, the system that helps human programmers by recommending programming software as they work. Now, in our private preview of Copilot launched last fall, I mentioned earlier, we found surprising interest and tremendous usage, and a surprisingly large percentage of coding projects are using software generated by Copilot. Before going into what we call general availability of Copilot, We put Copilot through a responsible AI review. The multi-month analysis identified surprising security vulnerabilities and human factors issues, including over-reliance. Over 30 necessary mitigations were recommended to the GitHub team that oversees this project. And these mitigations are now underway. So new safety and user experience features will have to be added in advance of making this system generally available. And given the unknowns about what might happen with these in the system, a key recommendation was to build out more intensive monitoring and analysis to keep an eye on the technology. Another rising technology that came into a sensitive uses review is Microsoft's custom neural voice. Technology is quite stunning. You speak a few sentences to the system and it learns your voice and prosody so well that the system could call a loved one and ask them to write a check in a very persuasive way. Obviously, this technology brings up many important issues and concerns about well-intentioned as well as malevolent uses of the technology. The general distribution was blocked by the sensitive uses process, and users were brought under severe restrictions, I think quite appropriate. And here's a public video which describes the controls.
Custom Neural Voice from Microsoft Azure creates highly natural synthetic voices using self-provided speech data. A unique digital voice can create a recognizable identity that matches your brand. The voiceover of this video is provided by Jenny, a Microsoft Azure Neural Voice. Custom Neural Voice is powered by artificial intelligence. At Microsoft, we are deeply committed to advancing AI with ethical principles that put people first. To ensure these lifelike voices are used responsibly, we are limiting access to vetted users. To apply to use Custom Neural Voice, you must be subscribed to Microsoft Azure services and fill out the application form in detail. Only approved customers can access the service. Once approved, there are requirements that all customers must follow. Never use text-to-speech integrations to deceive or misinform anyone. Only use the service within the use case they describe. Have written permission from voice talent prior to creating a voice model. Communicate the synthetic nature of the service to the listener. And be transparent about the capabilities and limitations of the service and provide additional support. Please fill every part of the intake form in detail, as every application is reviewed fully. You will be asked to provide your company email address, business address, and Azure subscription ID. It is essential that information is up to date and matches our records. You will also be asked to describe your use case in detail, including the benefits to your customers of interacting with the generated synthetic voices. Please be thorough when you describe how you're planning to use the technology. Generic or vague user scenarios will be denied. The more detail you provide, the easier it will be for us to review your application without additional questions. There are a series of supporting questions that need to be answered, including: confirm these voices are intended only for your business and that you are not applying on behalf of your customer. Indicate how you will inform end users that you're using a synthetic voice to ensure transparency. And describe the intended persona of the synthetic voice and whether it's based on a real or fictional person. We look forward to seeing how you use Azure's Custom Neural Voice to deliver brand new experiences. Visit aka.ms/customneural to get started.
A second disruptive capability is AI-generated synthetic media, posing a risk to trusted journalism and being a threat to democracy and the acceleration of disinformation. This is the technology behind the famous rise of deep fakes. And this technology rising led us to the assessment that AI detection methods, as well as human abilities, would fail to detect and be able to discriminate synthetic media from actual fact. This context framed our efforts at Microsoft to come up with glass-to-glass authentication methods, moving outside of AI, thinking deeply about what we call media provenance, technologies that could certify that the photons falling on the glass of light-sensitive surfaces of cameras would be reflected in the pixels on displays after transmission. So the technologies can certify cryptographically the source history of changes of media content. And we worked very closely with partners, the BBC, New York Times, CBC, Adobe, and others to set up several consortia, including the new Coalition for Content, Provenance, and Authenticity, which just published a standard. There's a bill in Congress, Portman and Peters bipartisan bill on the Deep Fake Task Force Act to study media provenance. But the basic idea is to have technologies now in cross-platform applications that can do digital content provenance, including tools from Microsoft, Adobe, and others. We're now in the middle of an Ether review of another disruptive technology, the use of large-scale multimodal neural networks, models that could that reason across language and vision, imagery and video. The DALL-E system from OpenAI, a strategic partner, is now in private preview. It creates from scratch, given massive training corpora, imagery based on natural language prompts. I should mention that as an example, I've had access to the system and I've been playing with it. And I said, oh, well, what if I wanted to combine solar panels with solar pool heating systems into one system? And the system generates from scratch, bit by bit, these beautiful renderings of how this might work, seemingly to propagate the appropriate physical constraints. If I can, I can ask him, show me this in a sketch form. And interesting, stimulating ideas and visualizations are being generated by the system. So that's being reviewed right now, given all possibilities that we might face, including offensive content, for example, being generated one day, or violations of privacy through the training data going into generation. By the way, here's what the system generated bit by bit for the query: a meeting of scholars in Philadelphia in a cozy auditorium. From scratch. And I thought I'd try some fun renderings. A modification of the query: a meeting of scholars in Philadelphia listening to the presentation by a large, well-educated teddy bear. And it often generates multiple images for any query. So I hope you found our experiences and approach interesting. Moving forward, we can expect disruptive innovations from artificial intelligence research as we march ahead with the scientific work and the engineering and applications. We need to invest in understanding the influences of the technology on people and greater society. We need to formulate mitigations and policies. There needs to be a tight interleaving of the core innovations with intensive efforts on responsibilities and governance. Thank you.